And so I'm going to turn it back over to Helen. She's going to talk a little bit about soil health, I believe. So welcome to everybody on the live stream, and take it away.
Well, thanks again for having me, everybody. I am Helen Skiba. I totally did not introduce myself at all last night, so I'm sorry about that. I'll do it now. Let's see, I just want to make sure this thing is working. What did we do last time? No? Oh, wow. Okay, it works. So yeah, my name is Helen Skiba, and this is my 10th season farming. My farm is currently down between Boulder and Longmont, so northwest of Denver, in Colorado on the Front Range. I feel like just having been here and hearing about different experiences that y'all have, it seems like that our regions are pretty similar as far as the amount of rainfall that we get and kind of the aridity and the altitude. So I think that there's a lot of crossover between my experience and yours. Yeah, this is my third season on the current farm, which is a collective of different farms. So we have 3 different farms on the property along with different businesses. Like a vermicomposting operation. We have a bunch of landscapers that store their stuff in our big barn, and then I get to live on the property as well. So we lease the land from another farmer who has an animal operation a few miles away from us. And then the farm was a hemp farm for about 4 years before we got it, and then the hemp bubble burst, and those people went bankrupt. Then before that, it was a feedlot for cattle, so it was quite the cleanup project when our landlords got it, but they really turned it into something that's really special. And so I work with my husband who farms with me. I have 1 full-time employee and 2 part-time employees, and then we are on about 1.5 acres of our cut flowers, and then expanding a little bit. We've got more land to expand into as we kind of start growing on this new farm. And then I work with 2 other farms, so Speedwell Farm and Gardens. They do diversified vegetables. And then we've got the Jolly Radish Farm, who also does vegetables, but on a sort of a more tractor-based scale. So myself and Speedwell Farm and Gardens are more hand tools, although I am definitely looking for some mechanization on the farm as I get older. So that's who we are, and I've done so many different kinds of things with flowers over the years, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what your needs and questions are. So when I started out with just weddings. It was just weddings all the time because I was on a farm that was also a wedding venue. And so I was a vegetable farming intern there the first year, and they were like, hey, do you want this flower job? Because the lady who's doing it, she's going to go to South America or something. And I was like, sure, great, cool. And then she had already booked like 20 weddings for the next season. I was like, okay, cool, great. Like, I'm going to learn how to farm flowers and put flowers together for weddings, over this winter. So the huge learning curve. And but then over the next 4 seasons I was able to like really grow that business until I was having the last year we did 100 weddings, which no one should ever do. Don't do that. But and that was on a small farm. That was like 3/4 of an acre. But then having done that and having built that business, then I was like really hungry for keeping on doing it. So I got, in the interim, I got a job at a large-scale vegetable farm as their flower crop manager. So they, were stewarding about 100 acres, and they were certified organic and biodynamic, but they did, they just had big tractor farm, a lot of tillage, and it was an interesting experience for learning about how to farm on that scale and how to deal with water and, the different sources of water on that property and going to market and running a really big CSA, so that was a great experience for those couple of years. And then finally got this opportunity to have our own land. I had been looking for a farm of our own, but it's just impossible down there. So actually the largest flower farm down in our area in Colorado actually just went up for sale for $9.75 million. It's 10 acres and it's got, lots of perennials and stuff on it, but those are the kinds of prices that like people are paying for acreage down in our area. So it's just sort of impossible for us to find a place to buy at that point in our lives. But this property came up for lease and we were like, well, great, let's put together this coalition of people that's going to make it happen. So that's the story of Artemis up till now, and we've been doing everything. So there's weddings, like I was saying, farmers market. I do on-farm workshops. My husband is Dutch, and his family has been importing tulip bulbs for about 70 years, and so we sell the tulip bulbs to people, in our area and throughout the States, if you need me. And we also did a big dahlia tuber sale last couple of years, so that's been really, really nice. And so farmers market, on-farm workshops, weddings, tubers and bulbs, and then we have a small flower share program as well, or CSA. So, but we'll talk about that later. I wanted to get into soil health, tillage, and cover cropping today, so that's what this is about. And so I'm really curious, first of all, I'd just like to hear I'm going to pick on somebody, so I'm going to pick on you. Taylor, what does soil health mean to you?
So I vegetable garden on a way larger scale than needed for a long time. And so soil health is really important, I guess, especially where I am, because I'm in a very sandy area. And so you don't really maintain nutrients as well in the sand. And so I've had to get really good at what to add to my soil and crop rotation, which has been huge in the vegetable. So it's really important because you can go from a 5 bushel a week tomato crop, like if you have good soil or like good health, to 2 if you aren't taking care of it.
Yeah, so Taylor mentioned a couple of things from what we're adding to our soil, making sure that we're, kind of replenishing what we're taking out, and also rotating our crops so we're maintaining health of our plants as well from diseases and also different nutrients that they're taking up, right? Awesome, that's great. And then can I hear about from you maybe what are you doing for, what kind of tillage or bed preparation do you do on your farm?
So that has been part of my adventure, is trying to work, regeneratively, and some of the principles, I guess, that has been a challenge for, especially compared to like my botanic background, where we tilled, we did, all this. Yeah. So I experimented. I'm experimenting and as an arm of the farm. So one section I solarized, and then I just individually planted transplants right directly into mostly dead grass. And just kind of let it grow in it. And then another section I did sheet mulching. So I put down cardboard and then straw and then compost from like our sheep and livestock. And then the other section I took a sod cutter. So I did rent a piece of machine for that one, and I cut it and flipped it and planted in the row between where I flipped it. And then after I was sure that part, the middle part that I flipped was dead, then I also seeded and planted into that.
Wow.
And so that was because our idea is adding the compost and then at least as minimal disturbance as we can, or at least trying that out. So
right.
That's kind of what I tried.
Very cool. Thank you.
I'm curious what it'd be like with a lot of dahlias and stuff.
Sure.
And things like that. So, but
Thank you, Christina. So Christina mentioned a couple of different techniques. Solarizing, which is basically a clear piece of plastic over the ground that's going to kind of cook everything under there. It works really well in a short period of time. And then sheet mulching, which is basically just piling all kinds of different organic matter on top of the current ground there. And then sod cutting, which is something I hadn't heard of before. It's very cool. So, you know, I imagine sort of a machine that cuts the sod like this, and then you flipped it over and you planted into the seam of where you had cut.
Yeah, so I cut 3 strips, and then I left like 2
Right.
channels and planted between that. And I
Very
should
cool.
mention too that we try to keep everything covered. So like,
Right.
I do put cover crops, and actually like, I don't know, I allow weeds to grow. At least to some degree, you know, and I just kind of judge it on if I feel like it's competing or causing a problem. And then, yeah, it's awesome.
Do you have vineweed?
I don't have a big problem with bindweed, but I don't like if it got in, we'd see what that would do, yeah.
Lacey asked if she had bindweed, or vineweed, some people say vine, whatever. So we have a lot of bindweed on our farm. Yeah, and it's hard for sure. All the perennial weeds are hard when you're not tilling, for sure, so. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, you know, I just want to say that there's infinite ways of building your soil health, whether you're tilling or you're not tilling, and everybody's situation is different. And so as long as we're thinking about, like, how can we make sure that our soils are, you know, still alive, that we're not taking too much out of them, that we're trying to foster the life in the soil, I think that you're doing a good job. So great. Well, I just want to, so there's a lot of words out there around soil health, and what I say about our farm is that we're an ecology-focused farm. So what that means to me is that we're focused not only on the health of our plants, but we're also focused on the whole ecology, the system of our farm, which includes everything from like the bobcats and the owls and the herons that are in the pond to you know, the microorganisms in the soil, whether that's nematodes or fungi or archaea and bacteria, and you know, everything in between there. So all of the you know, little voles that are out on the farm, like burrowing and eating my cover crop seed, and you know, so but seeing a lot of diversity and trying to see how our farm is part of the larger ecological processes that are happening around us, and recognizing that the farm doesn't belong only to us, but belongs also to every other form of life that is out there. And so, you know, what that leads to for us is just gentleness and being as gentle as we can with the earth that we're so lucky to have to steward, and also, you know, trying our best to let everybody live. That's sort of what we like, is to try and make sure that everybody's welcome and living. So when I first started, I don't know if you can see real well, but this is a pretty picture of me with pretty flowers. But behind me is a lot of bare ground, because that was sort of what I had been taught at my vegetable farming internship and stuff. And so this was in the fall, and we had, you know, torn out all the plants and taken them over the compost pile. And then, but at this point, I was starting to do some more fun things. Actually wearing the same shoes. That's crazy. Oh my God, that's from like 2017 or something. Yeah, once you start farming in earnest, I feel like I don't have time to go clothes shopping like at all. So anyway, but behind me, I was starting to do a lot, like I had mulched all of those beds just with compost that we had made on the farm, which was great. I mean, I wasn't even buying compost at that point. The farm was small enough that I was able to make compost with our little bucket tractor and everything. So all those beds were mulched, and then I had started doing a little bit of cover cropping, but I wasn't really sure kind of how quite yet. So I had some rye like germinating in the background of that picture. So, you know, I think what's interesting about what Christina said is that we might let weeds grow, or we might, do things that, this farm looks really nice, right? Like, it looks really pretty. And I've found that as I go into more of an ecological farming mode, my farm looks a lot less pretty. And it's not that it looks less neat and organized, right? And I don't mind that necessarily, although I'm a very like type A person, so I'm like, I like it, organized in my spreadsheet or whatever, right? And I like to look at a nice clean bed and clean rows. But what I've found is that I'm often just struggling too hard against things that I don't need to struggle against to make my farm look a certain way. So now my farm looks a lot different. Okay, so I want to talk about the 5 principles of soil health, because it's a really good foundation for thinking about how we can be good stewards, and what are the ways that different management practices can fit in on our farms. So does anybody have one principle of soil health that they can tell me? Yes, Rick.
Keep soil covered.
Keep the soil covered, yeah. So Christina said that as well. So keeping the soil covered, and why do we do that?
Erosion, evaporation, all the microbiome doesn't really like that direct sunlight.
Yes, evaporation, erosion, and keeping the microbes happy under there, and also maybe giving them something to eat, right, on top of the surface, if it's an organic cover that you have on there. So yeah, keeping the soil covered is a good one. Anybody else want to offer one more? Livestock. Oh, livestock. I like that. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So integrating animals is an important part of regenerative soil health. And there's, on a small farm that can be difficult, but there are ways that we can think about integrating animals. And I'm so cool. I think it's so cool that there are so many people here that are already working with animals, and you have a really great resource in your hand to start incorporating those animals into your farm for health. What about you, Christine?
That tillage reduction component, reduction or elimination of tillage.
Great. So yeah, that's another, or minimizing disturbance of our soils, right? So those are all really important. So we'll go through each of those a little bit. The first one for me is keeping roots in the ground, living roots in the ground, and maximizing photosynthesis. So plants are incredible alchemical magicians, right? They are taking energy from the sun a million zillion miles away, and they're making sugar out of that sunlight with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, okay? And then they're actually taking that sunlight and air, and they're exuding sugars into the soil. So they're making different kinds of associations with different microorganisms in the soil. They're incredible. I mean, it's so cool. Like, every day, every plant that you see is doing something that is, we can't do it. No, other animals can't do it. It's so cool. And so what's important is keeping those roots in the soil alive, so that all that sunlight, we're gathering it and we're putting it into our soil as a bank, right? So we keep on putting that sugar and other compounds back into the soil. So what that looks like will often be just that's keeping the soil covered as well. And it's also, it might look like cover cropping, or it might look like, really quick bed flips for you. So, instead of having a bed come out and then you're like, I'm not gonna think about that. We're going to put something there, whether that's another crop, or it's a cover crop, or it's, at least some mulch to keep the soil covered. So this one would be, keeping the soil covered, right? So this is a cool method of no-till corn planting, where it looks like they had wheat or something beforehand, and they had mowed or crimped that, and then sowed the corn into the top, so that it's not bare soil, and we're preventing erosion. We're also conserving water, all kinds of things in these rows where this straw mulch is. And then those corn plants are going to benefit from the reduction of evaporation, and so much good stuff happens. And then the life under that soil is going to have some carbon to eat as well on the surface, the earthworms and the bacteria. So this one would be minimizing disturbance. So I want to say the fact of us being here in this room talking about how we're farming, we're all disturbing things all the time, you know, so that's why it's minimizing disturbance or integrating these principles into your farm as much as possible. Now, as much as possible, and like I mean that, you know, when it's possible, right? So just keeping it in your mind, how is it possible for me to integrate this principle at this time, right? So minimizing disturbance to me means, you know, this is a traditional tiller, and what that does is it inverts the soil layers. So it actually takes what's underneath and puts it on top. Okay, so that's pretty much the most disturbance that you could do, inverting it and putting it on top, right? There's other forms of disturbance that we do that might be a little less disturbing, okay? So maybe we're using a power harrow that sort of turns the soil like this, horizontally rather than vertically. Maybe we're using a broad fork that goes in and aerates, or a spader, it's sort of similar to a spader. And, you know, there's different kinds of tools that we can use to minimize what we're doing to the soil life when we're trying to prepare a bed. So just thinking about how can we both, you know, get the soil tilth that we need to put the roots in, to put the seeds in, but also as little as possible disturbing the homes that those animals and bacteria and archaea and everybody is building under the soil, right? We want everybody to have a home in our soil and not have to rebuild it every time that we flip a bed. This one for me is diversity. So diversity is a really important principle of soil health, because when we're out there and we've just planted, you know, an acre of sunflowers or something, right? What that does is that you've got this monocrop, and not only is there only one type of plant, which means there's only one type of sugar and one type of association going on under there, but you also are putting yourself at risk for all kinds of diseases, pests, et cetera, that might come in, and because there's not a diversity of crops there, they're going to wipe out the whole thing, you know. So diversity means resilience. Diversity means a safety net, and like a you know, you've got different pillars that you're standing on, right? So if one of those wobbles and falls over, you've got somewhere else to stand as well, right? And so diversity is essential, I think, in all parts of farming, whether we're talking about the diversity of your cover crops and your cash crops, to, you know, the different kinds of fertilizers you might be putting on, or different kinds of biological amendments, and all kinds of ways that we can incorporate diversity. All right, and then, yeah, the last one is incorporating animals. So this is what my animal incorporation tends to look like, is that we've got some chickens, and I've been using them to hunt grasshoppers in our farm. But there's a lot of different ways that we can try to incorporate animals. So maybe we're rotating a flock of sheep, or we're rotating a herd of pigs through parts of our garden when we're finished with them. So if there's a way for you to plan, say, okay, this block, I'm going to have that finished by this time in the year, and then I can move the pigs onto there, I can move the chickens onto there, you know, or are there ducks or something else that I can put in the garden that aren't going to disturb my flower crop. So this is actually easier, I think, with flower crops, because you're having, you know, you might have a nice tall big plant that a duck or a chicken isn't really going to bother at all once they're established, but they are going to go after the snails and the grasshoppers and things like that. And yeah, so there's ways that we can incorporate animals. Why is it important to incorporate animals? Well, first, their manure is really awesome. So chicken manure tends to be really high in nitrogen, which is often a limiting nutrient. You know, the sheep, same thing, really great manure. And then, you know, the action of their hooves in the soil can be a good way of you know, disturbing without too much disturbance. Same thing with, you know, if you have hogs that aren't major rooters. So we've used American guinea hogs on our property, and they've been great. They root a little bit, but it's not too intense. And as long as you're sort of rotating in a mindful manner and making sure that there's not, you know, they're not there for too long, using electric fences and that kind of thing. You can rotate animals through with good success. Okay, does that make sense? 5 principles that we can sort of think about and then go on from in our stuff. So, all right, to till or not to till? That is the question. So when I was starting, we had a small tiller, and we would till like in the spring, and then maybe we would till in the fall. So we weren't doing, super intensive tillage, but we were tilling once a season or so. And I think, we were doing a pretty good job of minimizing, though it wasn't sort of something I was thinking about at the time, but it just seemed like to me I didn't need to do it, So if I was able to get the seed and I was able to get the transplant in, then I didn't need to do it. So we'll just go through some pros and cons, and then what is it in the first place, right? So I talked about inversion, but there is a lot of debate. Oh man. Sorry. Let me see if I can fix that. That's no fun. What do I do? Okay, well, I'll just say them for you, sorry. So there's a lot of debate in the farming community about what is tillage and what isn't tillage, right? So what is disturbing to the soil and what isn't. So for example, intensive tillage is inverting the soil layers. So I talked about that, and that's doing that like often and deeply, right? So that would be intensive tillage. At the vegetable farm where I worked, I tried really hard, but these people were doing 5 passes, so they were using like a large ripper, and then they would use a disc, and then they would use a power harrow, and then they would do a tiller. And they might do that multiple times in the season. And so, it's just a lot. It's just a lot of disturbance and a lot of tillage. And, there were reasons for those passes. Sometimes it was still seed bedding where, they were letting some of the weed seeds grow and then doing the final pass with the tiller before we planted, which is a good way of getting rid of seedlings, but it's not a good way of getting rid of the weed seed bank because it brings more seeds to the surface. So then reduced tillage can mean strip tillage or once a season tillage, or it can mean shallow tillage as well. Minimal tillage would be inversion only when it's absolutely necessary. So maybe that's the first time that you go through the field, you're creating your beds. So that would be minimal tillage. And then no-till, a lot of people call their farms no-till, but, it can be all kinds of different things. So maybe it's a till thing, right? A light surface tillage. So there's little machines called a tilther that runs off of a drill that I've used. And those are pretty cool. And they only go about 1 inch deep. So you're getting really good tilth on the surface for planting seeds. Can be good for getting transplants into, depending on the size. And then it can include, hoeing and broad forking. So, when we're hoeing weeds, we're definitely disturbing that top layer of soil. There's not really a way around that. When you're pulling weeds, you're disturbing the soil. It's just happening. And then in conventional agriculture, this would be a lot of herbicides. So, like, you'll go through, let's say you're planting a corn crop, and, you go through and you put on the corn seed, and then you come through later and you've got, maybe it's a Roundup ready corn and you're just spraying Roundup all over that thing. But you're still doing no-till, right? Because you did it with a no-till drill. So it went straight into the ground. You're not disturbing the soil, but you're definitely disturbing, the plants on the surface of the soil and the seeds and everything. So it can include a lot of herbicides. True no-till would be absolutely no disturbance, which I don't really know how you would do that. Anytime we're doing anything to the soil, we're disturbing it. I just want to be clear about that. So what we're trying to do is really just minimize how we're impacting the soil and the creatures in it. All right, so some pros and cons. How about a pro for tillage? Anybody want to offer one?
It makes it a lot easier.
It makes it so much easier, totally.
Well, you have really hard soil, compacted soil
Yeah.
to begin with.
It can aerate it. It can help you, get some air down in there.
Makes your garden look pretty.
It makes it look pretty. It does make it look pretty, totally.
It's like you're feeling that sunburn. It's like, oh, it looks so
Very satisfying. Yes, I agree. Okay, how about a con or two?
Can be expensive.
Expensive, great. Time consuming, yeah. Awesome. So I'll go through some of the things that we talked about. So it aerates the soil. Aeration is really good because it stimulates bacterial activity. And the bacteria are the creatures that are going around and eating all of the organic matter in the soil, and they're turning it into plant available nutrients. So they need, just like us, they need oxygen to breathe and to do their biological processes. So it's important to have oxygen in your soil. So aerating it can actually release a lot of nutrients depending on how much organic matter is there to be eaten by the bacteria. It kills germinated weeds, great. Deep tillage, as we talked about, can relieve compaction. When compaction can be a really big problem, has been a problem on my farm. And it can be the only option in some situations. So if you're trying to grow something. So, it's a tool in your toolbox, tillage is. When you want to use it, it's a tool to be used not lightly. All right, some cons. So bacterial overloading, if we got too much oxygen in the system, then we can actually decimate other kingdoms of life where the bacteria their populations are so high that they're actually detrimental to nematodes, archaea, fungi, all kinds of other things. Or they can create conditions that are not ideal for fungi and other forms of life. Inverting soil layers can lead to die-offs of all kinds of different creatures, so earthworms, fungi, nematodes, because we are, a lot of that soil life is in the first 6 inches. So I love this quote. This is from NRCS. For soil organisms, tillage is the equivalent of an earthquake, hurricane, tornado, and forest fire occurring simultaneously. Okay, so not fun. It's not fun for them, right? And that was just my favorite thing. It was cool to see that from the NRCS. So if you think about it, it really is. It's like shaking up the world. You're probably totally destroying the houses that they've made for themselves. A hurricane, maybe there's just it's a lot of wind and oxygen coming in there. Tornado, same kind of idea. Forest fire, why forest fire? Because you're probably really increasing the heat that's in the soil by exposing it to more air and really drying it out. So it's just an interesting simile. Tillage can produce a hard pan over time and can decrease infiltration. So especially if we're tilling a lot at the same level over and over and over. So that will just create the blades of that tiller are just going to hit the same level, and they're smearing the soil underneath and just creating those clays are just going to create you know what I'm talking about. So that can be really detrimental to your plants. And also it burns through organic matter. So when I'm talking about that, I mean, let's say we've aerated the soil with tillage, and then we have an explosion of bacterial population, and they need something to eat. So they're going to eat all of that compost, manure, leaves, whatever you've put in your soil. They're going to eat it up, and they're going to turn it into CO2. And it releases carbon from the soil from that process and in the form of burnt fossil fuels that we're using to run the tillage equipment, right? So trying to avoid those things will hopefully help us to just continue making our world a little bit better, or a little bit disturbing our world as little as possible, right? So as little disturbance as we can. And it exposes weed seeds to water and light. So yeah, when you're tilling, what I've noticed on my farm since we stopped doing a lot of tillage is that there's way fewer annual weeds. So way fewer annual weeds. Once I get those annual weeds out, you know, lambs, quarter, amaranths, that kind of thing, they really aren't coming back because I've gotten the seeds out of this surface layer. And so if there's weed seeds in the soil deeper down, I'm not bringing them up by tilling. And so that means that they're just sitting there. They can't germinate yet. And then what I am seeing though is that now I've got, okay, now I have a problem with my perennial weeds where I've got lots of thistle, I have lots of bindweed. I got thistle, bindweed, I got mallow, I got things that are really deep rooted and that I'm just trying to make peace with. That's just the thing that we're doing. For the bindweed, there is a biological agent. I can't remember the species name, but it's a mite, a very microscopic mite that the Colorado insectary is producing. And I've applied that to a very bindweedy spot on my farm. It does seem to be helping even in the first year. So I'm pretty excited about that. You're never going to reduce, you know, your bindweed, you know, to zero, but this is supposed to help up to like 60% reduction of bindweed, which is very, very cool. So there are things to do about your perennial weeds besides just digging them up and over for 20 years. but that's kind of the option that you have, you know, and we can weaken them with other cultural practices like occultation, tarping, you know, and pulling them. Anyhow. Okay, so some of the soil issues, I would like to hear from y'all. What's your soil issue? Do you guys have issues at your farm? Compacted. Okay, yeah, that's a big one. That's tough. Anyone else want to offer something that they struggle with their soil?
I'm just going to cut in quickly. Let us know the fire alarm's going to go off. Ignore it. Unless people start running and you see flames, it's just a...
Okay. Okay.
We have saline areas in certain
Okay.
spots.
Saline. Okay, that's hard. That's hard to deal with. Have you been just like trying to leach it out? Water?
We're actually going to do a saline planting and
Oh,
just
cool.
take it out of production.
Gotcha. All right, anybody else?
I have a lot of pine duff, I call it.
Mm.
The pine trees have just been dropping needles for centuries.
Sure.
And so it's very light and fluffy. There's no dirt component to it. And I don't have, there's some areas of good topsoil. There's a lot of rock underneath. So I got a lot of schist, granite, microcline. So I'm constantly adding compost, compost. All I do, but I don't have good access to good dirt here, good compost.
Yeah.
So I've got my own, and you know, but I use it way faster than I'm making it. Now with my new area, I might be able to catch up maybe, but I'm buying it a lot, and I don't like buying it.
I understand. Why don't we just let that stop? I mean, maybe it has stopped. Okay. Great, lovely fire alarm. Just one.
Low-key fire alarm.
I know, that was great. All right, well, thank you for those issues. So compaction, salinity, and then generally just like different weird sort of parent material, I guess, is, you know, lack of organic matter. Yeah, so some of the things, compaction, number one, weeds. Too much moisture can be an issue. That was an issue for me this year. Too little moisture, of course, is an issue for all of us in the arid west. Too loose of a texture, too tight of a texture. Definitely mine is very tight. We have a super tight clay. And then, you know, for you, you've got a lot of sand, so that can be too loose of a texture where it's like, what are the roots going to hold on to? And then, of course, nutrient deficiencies. Like we were talking about. And then pH extreme. So something like pine duff can actually create, you know, a really acidic environment. For most of us, I would guess that we're in more of an alkaline area. Does anybody know? You guys have a pH of 7 or higher mostly? Anybody know? All right, you got to take soil tests. So you gotta get your soil to the land grant university and get your soil tested. So my soil is at about a 7.8 pH. Sometimes it gets up to 8. So that's not the worst thing in the world. But when you have a soil pH that's below 7, then you start running into nutrient deficiency problems because just the way that pH works, the ions of the water tie up different cations of nutrients that you're trying to get your plants to take up. All right, so your soil health toolbox consists of a bunch of different things. It consists, I'm going to start by talking about cover cropping because I think it's something that we can all integrate. Doesn't matter how big or how small you are, we can all think about some cover cropping. I'm going to show you what I've done on my farm, and then we'll talk about a little bit of different soil health practices. Okay, so cover cropping can relieve compaction, suppress weeds, add organic matter, keep roots in the ground. Legumes can add nitrogen, and it holds moisture, so it solves a lot, or it helps with a lot of the problems that we just talked about, a lot of the soil health issues. This is on a farm. Oh my God, where is she? She's in Virginia, but this is Gardener's Workshop. Lisa Mason-Ziegler, she's awesome. You should get her book, Cool Flowers, if you don't have it yet, and she's got a lot of cool education stuff up there. So this is buckwheat. Buckwheat is an awesome cover crop. It's so easy to grow and easy to terminate, and it makes a great mulch. It also suppresses other weeds or other seeds from germinating. I'll tell you a terrible story about buckwheat though. So last year I was like, oh, I'm a genius. I'm gonna put buckwheat underneath my dahlias. It's gonna be a really cool like undersowing, and I'm gonna cover the soil around my dahlias before they get really big, and it's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna have mulch, and it's gonna be so great. And so I put in the dahlia tubers, and then I planted the buckwheat on top. And that, I only did it on one bed, thank God, because those dahlias were really stunted and they were really slow. And I think it was because of this property that buckwheat has, which is called allelopathy, where it's actually inhibiting other seeds from germinating. And so even though we're not working with a seed, with a dahlia tuber, it was still detrimental to that bed's growth. So fascinating, very cool. I cut that buckwheat out and I was like, get out of here. But I used that mulch, I used the mulch on a different bed and it was great. But anyway, buckwheat is really quick to grow, so it can be a really great option if you just want to try one thing, if you're just like, okay, it's the end of the season. I took out this bed of sunflowers or something and I want to put a cover crop in there that's going to winter kill, so I don't have to worry about terminating it at all, but it will just die in the first frost, and B, like it's a good mulch for the winter time or for whenever you need a mulch. Okay, so this is one of the cover crops that I did starting last year. It's a little bit tough to see here, but this is a cover crop over here, and then I was doing like some leaves and straw and stuff on top of the beds. So it was a mix of oats, field peas, cowpeas, sorghum Sudan grass, which worked really well, and then a turbo radish. So that's a radish that, like a daikon, basically goes pretty deep into the soil, makes a nice big kind of hole, and water infiltrates over the winter. Basically turns into mush with the frost. So this was really fun to start because the sorghum Sudan grass quickly got, this tall, and then it was this tall. It was really tall. It was awesome. And so we started that in August is when we seeded the cover crop. And then by December, it had been under a couple of snows and it was totally smashed down and made a really great mulch over the winter to hold more moisture in the soil. And then this was in March of this year, so you can see this was a hole that one of those daikon radish made, and so it was, had made this nice deep hole that a lot of water was going into and getting deeper down into the, lower layers of my soil. And then we were able to just very, very easily rake off the cover crop from the surface and into the aisles, so it was a really nice mulch for our aisles that stayed, pretty good and suppressed weeds for a while into the spring. It was great, it was super simple. So I think that in any winters like ours, and let's see, you are Sherry, you're over in Are you in like zone 7-ish though?
No.
No, okay.
I'm on the border between a 5 and a 4.
Okay. Is anybody
Don't
in
need
like a zone 7 area? No. Okay. Everybody, okay. I was looking at South Dakota before I came. I was like, well, some of it's in zone 7. That's amazing, you know? But no, so if you're in a zone 5 winter, zone 6 winter, then these kind of crops are gonna winter kill and do a lot of decomposing, and like their roots are it's gonna be easy to get it off in the spring. So this was really fun. Really fun. I'm gonna start this video. So this was another cover crop that we did. There was a section of the farm that we were just like, it's not doing well. We don't like how it looks. It's clearly lacking organic matter. So what we did was in the fall of 22, we put in rye, wheat, and hairy vetch. And I think we had some like, you know, supposedly hardy field peas that went in there, but they didn't really do anything. So, but then in June of this year, we had this huge stand, really nice rye, and so we decided to try roller crimping that. So we have well, you'll see, it was a little roller crimper. It rolls down the rye, crimps it so that it can't, you know, it can't get the sugars and water back up into its body. And then that made a really nice mulch. So I'll show you this. This was in, yeah, I think very end of May or June. So yeah, you see all that cover crop there. There was a summer cover going in there. Then here's my husband, and he's got the roller crimper on. I don't know if you can see that really well. Oop. Oh, I started it again. I'm just going to pause it so that you can see the crimper. Oh, that didn't work either. Sorry, y'all. I'll just let it play. So, you know, 6-foot tall rye there, and then rolling that down with this crimper. And this is just on our little BCS tractor, but there's definitely, you know, big implements like this that you can get for a regular size tractor. And so that's all the rye rolled down, makes a beautiful mulch. And then it's really thick. I mean, it was like 3 inches of thick mulch on top. There you go.
And then that kills the roots.
Yeah, so it does. You got to be really precise about your timing with rye, because you have to have the anthers of the seed coming out. So when it's flowering, that's the time when you're going to terminate. And I think I did mine a little bit too early. I was like, gotta get it, let's get it. And I think I could have waited a little bit, because it did sort of like, sometimes it'll do like the Revenant where it'll like come back up, you know, a little bit, and you're like, oh man. So what we ended up doing was we just tarped the area. So we had a big silage tarp. So we just tarped that on top of the rye. I think we did that for about a month, just because, you know, I didn't need to get in there. But then, and that really killed it dead. And then you can see over on this side, we planted stuff into the from that rye, and that worked well, except for, so these were the marigolds. The marigolds did great. The marigolds liked it. They were into it. But then I had some smaller seedlings like straw flower and stuff, and I put those in there, and they were like, it's dark. No, and also there were a lot of grasshoppers this year. I know for everybody that's been a problem. So but the grasshoppers were just in there like eating the seedlings basically. So we ended up taking the mulch off into the aisles for most of those, but not for the marigolds. It worked well. So if you were doing something, you know, bigger, if you had a bigger transplant, you know, this works well for tomatoes, peppers, that kind of thing, if you're doing veggies. But then, so we tarped this, and then we raked the mulch into the aisles. It was thick, nice thick mulch for our aisles. And this was like the weediest section of my farm, and I have not had to weed those aisles this season. I mean, there's, you know, bindweed trailing around, and there's like a little bit of puncture vine, but you know, I'm okay with it. And then this is me. I'm seeding our summer cover crop into this. So I decided to rest this section for the whole season. So we did the fall winter cover crop, the rye that we rolled down, and then I raked that off. Well, first I tried to do it, in this bed, I tried to do it through the mulch with my little earthway seeder, but no, it didn't work very well. It would have been cool. It would have been really cool. I would love, if anybody's a machinist, I would like a bed-sized, no-till drill. That would be amazing, like 4 foot wide, really cute. That would be so cool. But yeah, so then we just raked it off and I used the earthway to plant our summer cover crop, which was the same thing that we had done before, which is the sorghum Sudan grass and some beans and stuff. Yeah, Taylor.
So you said like in the spring then you raked the top off. So did you have any problems when you went to plant into it, like with the root? I know.
With the holes and stuff?
Yeah, because we did radishes and turnips for our cattle, and, but they eat it and pull it out of the ground, it turns to mush. But the other stuff like sorghum Sudan, you're right. Like, did you have any trouble with the roots down in, like?
No, I mean, it was thick, you know. So my thing is like, I do a lot of transplanting. So mainly when I'm transplanting, the ones that I had pulled right out. I mean, they raked right off. The roots were not an issue for us. That might be different, and totally might be different on different kinds of farms and different kinds of soils. So, you know, give it a try though. If sorghum doesn't work, try a different grass. I think grass is really important, especially for our region, because we are in a grassland. And having grasses in your mix is good for the soil. It really helps. So, but yeah, so it raked off really easy for me. I would give it a try.
Yeah, okay. I was just curious about the roots. So you're still on the fight then? When you're trying
Not
to
really. No, not really.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty shallow rooted, and so they can't come off, and like there's actually a lot of disintegration and decomposition that happens over the winter. You'd be surprised, especially like in a mulched little area where it might be a little bit warmer underneath, so, or a little bit insulated anyway. So then, yeah, so we did that, and then, so this was June when we raked it off into the aisles, and we planted the sorghum Sudan and all the cowpeas and radish and stuff, so that was August. And then I don't have a picture of that same spot. I just forgot. But then this is our hoop house that I put cover in because we had overwintered plants in there. This was seeded at the same time, so this is now probably 7 or 8 feet tall. So it's a lot of biomass, point being. A lot of biomass, which means that there's a lot of mulch there for you to cover things with and a lot of material for the creatures in your soil to eat. It's just really fun. It's really fun to grow cover crops because you're like, wow, look at that. You know, it's like green and lush. It's really nice. It makes me really happy. And then this is sort of a picture of what that mix looked like. So you can see some of the peas in here. And then this is the pointy leaf, the cowpea. We have oats. And then the sorghum Sudan kind of looks like corn. It's, you know, a sorghum. So, and there's grasshoppers in there if you look closely. Surprise, surprise. They were in that hoop house. They were just eating the heck out of that cover crop in there, but it didn't care. It didn't mind.
They're livestock that you've integrated.
Exactly. I mean, you know, so they are, you know, eaten down in Mexico. If you ever had some chapulines, they're really good. Salty. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about different cover crop mixes. We've got spring cover crops. This is just a list. I'm not going to read all the things, but in the spring we want something that's going to germinate in a cool soil, but that's probably easy to kill so that you can put a cash crop in after that. So those are some of those things that might be easier to kill, either to pull out by hand or to mow and tarp, and they'll die. Summer is a hot germinator that's going to winter kill. So that's what I have more experience with. That's that sorghum Sudan grass, the buckwheat, all those things that you can put in. Let's say you've got a bed, well, I've talked about this already, right? A bed of sunflowers. Sunflowers are done. What I've done is I take the flail mower and mow down the rows of sunflower stalks, and then I can get some of that material off the bed into the aisles, and then we can seed whatever we want sort of in between the rows of sunflower. So that could be, you know, the mix that I mentioned. It could be buckwheat. And then you can either terminate that cover crop again, or you can just let it die with the frost, which is really nice. So let's say it's your last succession of sunflowers. You're like, boom, I'm going to put something, living roots in the soil in this bed that then I don't have to worry about, in the spring. I'm just going to be able to rake that off. And then and some of these things I'd really like to try, like the Sesbania is a legume that looks pretty cool. Sun hemp is also a legume, so that'd be interesting to try for some nitrogen fixation. The cowpea works really well in our climate. It's like a nice sort of drought-tolerant pea. The guar beans and mung beans and millets also work really well. And then the fall cover crops are the ones you're going to plant in the fall, and then they're going to overwinter, and then they start growing again in the spring. They make you a lot of biomass, like that rye that I was showing you guys that we roller crimped down. And then, you're trying to mix in usually some legumes in there to fix more nitrogen. So winter rye or wheat, the hairy vetch is a nice legume. The Austrian winter peas, I meant to overwinter, but maybe I didn't do it right. I don't know. And the crimson clover and mammoth clover are good ones as well. So the clovers, you want to be careful with because they can be a little bit more aggressive and harder to kill, at least with non-tillage methods. So you can look at these later on the slides. And then I've got a little, of course I have a spreadsheet for you. So I just want to make sure that you can look at this. So it's just got a bunch of different cover crops in here that I've done some research on. And so we've got the common and scientific name, the variety. Is it a cool germinator? Is it winter hardy? How do you terminate it? What are some good things about it and what are some bad things about it, right? So let's say I want, it's not a cool germinator. I want a hot germinator. Okay, so those are all my hot germinators: buckwheat, cowpea, guar beans, mung bean, pearl millet, sesame, Sesbania, sorghum Sudan, soybean, sun hemp, teff, and then all of these are not winter hardy either. So that's great. That's a great summer cover crop sort of selection out of here. Okay, so you can mess around with that and use it if it's helpful to you. There's also way better resources on cover cropping, like from Green Cover Seed has a really good sort of tool to help you decide what good cover crops might be for your area. Okay, and then I have this I made for myself because I was like, what am I gonna do, right? So it's a cover crop decision flow chart, and you can adjust it based on your frost dates. The question is, when did the bed finish? So if the bed finished before my last frost in the spring, like, it doesn't have anything in it for some reason, what can I put in there? And then I ask, is it needed for production for this season? No, then I'm gonna sow some cover crop in it. If it is needed, then I'm going to replant it with the cash crops. Okay, then in the summer, after last frost and before September 1st, now that might be, you might have to change that date for you. Like, if you want to get a cover crop started, I would say like a month before your last frost is kind of like the last date that you want to be planting a summer cover crop. Is the bed needed for summer successions? No, we're going to plant the summer crop. Yes, we're going to replant with cash crops. After September 1st and before November 1st, so this is your like cold fall time that you're going to plant cover crops. Is the bed needed for spring production next season? So like, do I need it in May? Do I need it in April? Then I'm not going to plant a cover crop there because it's going to be, there's not enough time for me to get it growing and terminate it. And then, so if I don't need it for spring production, I'm going to sow winter cover. If I do, then I'm going to mulch it with, something, with compost, straw, leaves, whatever you got. After, and same thing for after November 1st, when for me, it's just a little bit too cold for even those cold hardy seeds to be germinating. We're just going to mulch it. Does that make sense? Cool. You should cover crop. Cover cropping's the best. It's the best. All right, so I wanted to give you a couple of more just tools in your toolbox besides cover cropping, because there's a lot more tools out there for what you can do. So some deep vertical tillage be like a subsoiler, basically. I don't know, this guy, I just wanted to show you a little cool like video because it's just interesting to see how little this is disturbing the top layers of the soil. So I'm not sure what exactly is going on with this pipe here, but it's just a single ripper down in there. He's going pretty deep, 3 or 4 feet, I think he said. And then, so this is a good way to sort of relieve deep compaction. I think he's talking about something, but it's cool because he's coming back and he's gonna like smush the soil together over the top. And you can't, I think he says something like, you can't even tell that I was there. But that's going to give you a lot more drainage in that soil if you're doing, a few passes here and there. So something like that. And you can, gang those together so that you're getting more like 2 or maybe 3 of those guys if you've got a powerful enough tractor. Okay. The other thing we can do if we're on a smaller scale is broad forking. So it's like subsoiling, but for a much smaller scale. And it's, you're not going to get it as far down. Has anybody used one of these? Yes, yes? Okay. How do you like broad forking?
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
You get a good workout, but I like it.
Nice.
It, breaks it up really good without bringing a lot of the weed seed, like.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the more, so like, I help my friend, they farm over in Beulah. So she does more of the produce, but she's been doing that for a long time. And every year it gets easier and easier and easier. As opposed to like our initial, which was very difficult.
Yeah. So Lacey was saying that she's got a friend that's been doing broad forking every year and it gets easier for her every year, which is great. So basically, if you don't know a broad fork, it's basically a big fork that you stand on, and it's got mine. This is a Meadow Creature, which is a really nice brand because it's all steel. There's no wooden handles that are going to break. But our tines are about, I think they're like 16 inches long. This is like the biggest one that you can get. And you stab this thing into the ground, step on it. It's easier if you are a bigger person than me. I make my husband do it. And, I have to like jump on it and do this. And then, you're pulling it back. So you got the handles up here and you're stepping back, pulling on it and lifting up the soil from underneath. It's sort of like a nice butt lift for your soil. It can be really nice for relieving some compaction that might have happened just because we're working with the soil or because you've had, a heavy rain event or something like that. And, you can be as gentle with it as you want. Like this spring when we had so much rain that I had, 4 inches of standing water in my dahlias, I used my broad fork to go in and stab through the soil and work it really deep, and I was actually able to drain some of the water out by just opening up a little bit, but not pulling back on it. It was just pushing those tines down in the soil and making some channels for that water to run through. And it can just be really helpful with our tighter soils. And then adding organic matter is super, super important. We already talked about that. The more organic matter we can add, the better. That is what is going to solve just so many issues. It's a buffer in so many ways for different kinds of nutrient problems. You're not adding a lot of nutrients with compost necessarily, but it is a soil conditioner, meaning that it gives you more surface area in your soil for the nutrients to hold on to, more surface area for water to hold on to, more air pockets in your soil. So it just has this really cool structure that's sort of like a sponge, where there's just a lot of air pockets and a lot of surface area on it to get it into your soil and help your soil hold on to things. So yeah, it keeps your soil covered if you just put on top, increases your moisture retention, increases food and microbe habitat from all of those things that I just talked about. And then for me, and I know somebody mentioned that it was hard to find good compost here or cheaper compost. So I was listening to some podcasts and they were like, oh yeah, and I get my compost for $8 a yard. And I'm like, excuse me? $8 for a cubic yard. I pay 32, 4 times as much. So that was like a farmer out in Ohio, I think. So I pay a lot for compost, and it's tough. Like, I understand, and it's hard to get good stuff. I've been to 3 different compost vendors this year. I'm not satisfied with any of them. So, you know, you just got to shop around. And if you are able to spend the time and you have the equipment to make your own compost, that's probably best. Or if you can get together with other folks in your community and make something that's actually good. But it is kind of a full-time gig to make good compost. Okay, I'm going to get through this quickly because I know I'm running out of time here. All right, conservative fertilizing is important. So fertilizing is good because we're helping our plants to have better health and be more resistant to pests. We don't want to put so much compost or so much fertilizer into our soils that we're actually leaching nutrients out or causing imbalances in the soil. So I do a lot of foliar spraying to immediately address any issues that my plants are having. So that might be with a nitrogen, fish emulsion, or kelp or something like that, like a bloom solution. And then I do some meals and things like that, like feather meal, fish meal, cottonseed meal, whatever is good and accessible to you in your area. It might be, you know, chicken manure that's dried. That can be really good. And then just adding those things in that are going to be broken down over a longer period of time, that over time your soils are going to be in a cycle of breaking down those sort of raw materials into plant available nutrients. Yeah, and so, you know, we can also think about, well, I think that's my next slide. So occultation and tarping, that's a really good technique. You just get an opaque tarp. It doesn't have to be enormous. It can be the landscaping fabric that you might already use just without holes in it. So I use a big silage tarp like this. They cost, I don't know, $300 for a 50 by 100. Really great way to, you know, prep your ground without disturbing it. I find that it can be really nice under there, a really nice environment after it's been on for, you know, you can do it as little as 2 weeks in the summertime when it's nice and hot, maybe a little bit longer, a month or 6 weeks in the spring. Keeps your soil covered, speeds decomposition, and definitely reduces this weed seed bank because under there it's nice and warm, it's pretty moist, and so weed seedlings are going to germinate, but then they're going to die because they don't have any light. And that's awesome. All right, and then solarization we talked about, so it's the same thing, only with a clear piece of fabric, of plastic. And so it can really quickly kill the vegetation, and then it actually sort of acts like soil fumigation because in that top layer, you know, maybe ½ inch, you're gonna kill quite a lot of organisms. And most of your good guys are gonna still be in at a little bit lower depth, but you can kill a lot of pathogens up there. You just don't wanna use it longer than 5 days. Deep mulching is another way of really, you know, protecting your soil. So that can just be whatever kind of mulch that you have lying around. It might be leaves, it might be straw, you know, it might be, you know, wood chips, although you got to be careful with the wood chips, not integrating them into your soil too much. It can be, you know, old plant residues, whatever you have that can just keep the soil covered, and that can include your pathways, but also on the beds so that we're really retaining moisture and making sure that those soil microbiota are fed. And incorporating animals, so this is my chickens on my farm in my zinnia patch. So I have my little electric fence and the little chicken coop, and they just really enjoyed being in there, and they're like taking dust baths in the aisles, and they're eating grasshoppers, and you know, so this was a really simple way to just put animals in our farm, and we can rotate them, you know, however we want through the farm. Especially in the established crops, it can be really good. So, and plenty, I'm sure you guys have way more creative ways of integrating the different animals that you work with into your farm. And then finally, just encouraging the rest of the world to come into your farm. So can you put up bird boxes or bat boxes? Can you get beneficial nematodes from like Arbico Organics and add them into your soil? You know, bird baths are beautiful, and you get to look at pretty birds, and they come, and a lot of the birds that are going to use a bird bath are insectivores, so they're going to be eating, you know, hopefully you don't have Japanese beetles. Do you have Japanese beetles here? Okay, good. None of that. But grasshoppers, you know, different biting insects and stuff that are, you know, sucking at your plants. A lot of those birds are insectivores. So how can we sort of say, hello world, I'm here, we invite you, come and join our farm and be part of our workforce. Okay, let's do some questions. Thank you for listening.
I'm in the mountains, and rock is my base of my garden, and so I have created raised beds. I'm interested about cover cropping in a raised bed, and I know I can get up there and maybe weed eat or do whatever to break it down, but I was afraid of putting something in that I wasn't going to be able to kill the roots. And I know they say living roots, and I get that, but it's like, it's scary. It's like introducing, you know, sod to my my raised bed. So maybe start small in the summer ones that will actually die back if you have a frost. It would probably be the best way to start.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start. So Jenny asked about what about cover cropping in raised beds. And I get that question a lot, and people do it really successfully, and I think that that's a really good way of starting, is just by using those plants and experimenting. You can just, like, if you just get a little bit of that seed and just see how that plant grows, you know, and then you can say, okay, well, that's going to work for me, but not this one, you know, this one's way too hard. And then maybe you only have like a couple of plants to pull out of your garden, right? So like if you were going to do a rye in a raised bed, you know, I don't know, you probably need all of your raised beds, you know, for the spring. So you probably aren't going to want to do that anyway.
I chop and drop whenever too, so I don't ever remove any of the roots, because I want to keep all that soil in there because I paid for it.
Yeah.
And so I just chop it and let those roots deteriorate, and so any crop that I've had in there, it stays in there. And then I'll just cut up, as long as it's not tomatoes or potatoes, because I'm afraid that I'll get some disease if I leave those particular foliages in there. But
yeah,
everything else comes out and or stays in, and then chops and drops and
that's another great method, is just instead of at the end of the season when you're like, okay, I'm done with this bed and now I'm going to tear everything out by the roots, you don't have to do that. You do not have to do that. And actually the root ball that's under the soil is going to be a great source of food for the microorganisms over the winter. And in my experience, even sunflowers, you know, I mow them and leave the stalks there on the ground over the winter, and then those stalks, the root and the like little stump of the sunflower over the winter, easy to pull out. So much easier than trying to do it at the end of the season, and you're like, you get out the crowbar, you know. You don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. That's the thing about some of these no-till practices, is that it actually can make your life easier. And so chopping and dropping, what Jenny's saying is we're just taking off the top of the plant and letting it lie there like a mulch. So the plants that you already have can be a great mulch and a way of using it. So, but then as for cover cropping in the raised beds, I would definitely choose things that either are shallow rooted or easy to pull out. Like the buckwheat is such a good one to start with, super easy. And then you can graduate to like bigger things like oats is really easy to, peas, you know, they're not hard to pull out. But as long as you can, you know, keep those living roots in the soil as much as possible. And if living roots in the soil isn't possible, that's okay. Just mulch it. If you can't do mulch, it's okay. Just put, you know, something over the top of, you know, landscaping fabric or something like that to just retain moisture and you know, keep those guys happy under there.
What we've been doing, we also have like patches of, like we're sandy loam, then we have some desirable patches of ground, and then we have really rocky out there. And we've been using in our raised beds our junk wool. We have some dairy sheep whose wool is absolute trash. And then we like our belly wool and stuff like that. And there's tons of sheep producers around here, and we throw the belly wool away. Like it literally brings us no profit. You know, you can find all kinds of resources like that. People are using it for aeration. We've used it in there, and they're even talking about making a pelletized wool to mix in with the soil, which is that's kind of cool. So there's a lot of, I think, resources.
That's so great. So yeah, so Lacey's saying that the belly wool sheared from her sheep can be a really good, mulch and also maybe soil amendment, which is awesome. And the point being, you know, that there's resources for all of this all around you, and you just have to, like, you know, it's one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? So when, you know, let's say you live in a neighborhood and people have lots and lots of leaves laying out at the curb this time of year, go get those. Just go and get them. They are such a valuable resource. I mean, get a trailer and throw all those bags in the back. You're going to save the city people a backache, and you're going to get like this amazing amendment for your soil. Whenever I've put leaves on anything on our farm in the fall, I'm like so happy about it in the spring, because they really, you know, they disintegrate over the season, over the winter, and the soil underneath them is nice and black and beautiful the way you want it to be. And you know, the wool is going to do that same thing. I bet it's like super insulating, and really holds on to moisture.
Question I had with mulch, and like my husband and my dad, you know, I want to farm by the side of it, as you know, I was using grass clippings and even old junky hay or whatever, not wasting. But are we reintroducing like a whole bunch of weeds or whatever into our area?
That's always a risk, for sure. I mean, you know, especially, I wouldn't worry too much about like moldy hay or anything like that. I don't think the molds that are, you know, in the hay are really, they're not pathogenic for your living crops generally. They're decomposers. So I wouldn't worry about that. And then as far as weed seeds, I mean, you're just always going to have anything that you're putting in your farm, you're going to have weed seeds. If your soil is out there, if there's wind on your farm, you're going to have weed seeds. Like, you know, that's just going to happen. So unfortunately, weeds are a fact of life. But yeah, I mean, you know, I would be careful and just say, like, if this doesn't feel right and it doesn't look right, and if you're really concerned, you can always do like a pathogenic test from the university or something like that. In high tunnels, yeah. I just started this year doing that. So you do have to have some time, and it can be difficult, you know, if you're like, okay, well, the high tunnel is really precious space for us. So if you don't have time, it can be tough. But buckwheat is a good solution in there because it's really quick. So I think it's 35 to 55 days from seed to, thank you. Oh, Christine knows.
I have a follow-up photo of buckwheat in high tunnel.
Amazing. Great. Yeah, so buckwheat's a really good one. It can be, you know, really regenerating to the soil. What I've found, it's like, because my tunnels are just weird. There's just issues with the soil in there. But when I plant buckwheat, I'm like, what? This is amazing. It's like really gives me a lot of tilth. It's like, it's nice. It's really nice. And then I did our summer cover crop in our high tunnel, and I took the cover off because I was like, I just want, because I overwintered plants in there, and I had bellflower and foxglove and like carnation in there. And then by June, end of June, everything was done in there. And I was like, well, I don't really have time to plant another crop in here now that's going to do well for me, you know, before frost. So I said, I'm going to cover crop the high tunnel. So I did that mix of the sorghum Sudan and the cowpeas and stuff. And it's really tall now because it was under the cover for a minute, and those plants all really like heat. So it was really nice and tall. I took the cover off, and now the plan is to just let the snow come down and sort of do some leaching that sometimes needs to happen in high tunnels. Yeah, but mine's a caterpillar tunnel. So if your cover is like, if you have wiggle wire in there and it's like pretty nailed down, you might not be able to do that. That's okay. You can just, you know, let it die down. If you have cold enough winters and you can roll the sides up in the high tunnel, then you should get enough frost that it'll die. It's just not going to get that like smashing effect of the snow. So but I would definitely try the buckwheat to start out with. And then if you want to try something else in the future, give it a try, as long as you have that window of time. You can either cut it and drop it, or if it winter kills, so it just dies from the frost, then you can just leave it there and let it get, all the cold that it's going to get, and then hopefully you'll be able to rake it off in the spring and not have to till or scrape it out or pull it by hand. That would be the best. So the buckwheat will do that really easily for you. So it'll just die. You can leave it there as long as you need it, or you can take it immediately off. And buckwheat's easy to pull out even when it's alive. Like, you just yank it, it's the easiest. So.
Do you ever leave your, like in the fall, leave your florals standing for birds and things like that? Just curious, because we've done that quite frequently in our place.
Yeah, the question is, do I leave flowers standing in the field over the winter? Absolutely. Actually, in my field, we have about 8 beds of annuals and then a bed of perennials, and 8 beds of annuals and a bed of perennials. So we'll leave the perennials standing. Often, so this year I've been really intensively adding more compost. So I have been mowing and then composting, or mowing and raking and then composting, because we just are having so many issues with the clay being really tight. But yeah, you absolutely can leave things there. That's another thing, is like, you don't have to clean up at the end of the season. You really don't. There's some things that you're going to want to, like your peonies and things that can get, some diseases. But for the annuals, for the most part, what I've seen is, like, unless you have a plant that's got a disease, like let's say your snapdragons get rust or something, you want to get that out of the field. But if they're healthy plants, leave them lie. There's no reason really to take them out, and it's going to be a lot easier to do in the spring anyway. As long as you feel like you have the capacity in the spring to get that done. Sometimes it's easier to do things in the fall because you're like still rolling and you still got a crew or something, and then you got a little bit less to do in the spring. But if you can always leave them standing. I would say, yeah. One more.
I was just curious where you've got the little roller crimper.
Oh.
I love that thing.
So yeah, the question was, where did I get this tiny little roller crimper? It was adorable. We got that from our landlords. They had it. You can find whatever you want on the internet, and people make like all kinds of things for BCS. And other kinds of, and you don't have to have a BCS to use that thing. The first time we used it, we put it on the back of our ATV and like dragged it around, and that was great. But the roller crimper, there's a lot of people out there manufacturing like really custom implements for a BCS or a small tractor. Yeah.
Yeah, we have like a big one, but I would just love the small scale of
Yeah.
like that.
Me too. But no, I want all custom machinery all the time.
It looked like her husband was being manhandled
By that thing.
It was hard.
Need a big guy to come with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really like, it's just a little, hitch situation. So it's like, you gotta just be like, it was hard, but it worked really well. Yeah.
Just a note on that, specialty producers, we did launch a Facebook group that's called South Dakota Ag Equipment Tool Sharing Group.
Oh, great.
And it doesn't have a ton of activity. Actually, Christine's put some things in there. So if you create or purchase some equipment that you'd like to, maybe say, I'll rent this out to anybody within a 100-mile radius, they can contact you and set up a rate. Because pieces like that you're probably not using.
Yeah. Not all the time. One day in June.
Rent or borrow something, you can put a request on it as well.
Yeah.
What was that again?
Let me look it up and then I'll tell you the actual name.
So Lauren was saying that there's a tool sharing group on Facebook with the specialty producers.
South Dakota Agriculture Equipment and Sign Tool Sharing.
South Dakota Agricultural Equipment and Tool Sharing. Got it. Ampersand.
Okay.
I think we have to stop.
We have to break. So, potty break.